everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here in this space on our NBC6 podcast. On assignment, 40 years of covering Florida. I'm Roxanne Vargas.
And I'm Tony Pipitone, that reporter who's been covering Florida for 40 years, the last dozen or so here. And before that, I was in Central Florida.
Daily journalism. You're going to, take a step back as you ride off into the journalism sunset for retirement, Tony.
That's what they call it. I'm not sure what form that's going to take. I mean, this is pretty much all I've done in my professional life for more than 40 years, really. I mean, this is a look at me back in the with the bad haircut days at the University of Maryland Diamondback newsroom in 1982, and then in job-seeking mode.
Sharp. Look at that fit, as the young folks say, the fit, the outfit, the look.
Yeah, would you put that guy on TV? Truly a face made for newspaper.
No. But that is how you started out, newspaper.
Yeah, at the Washington Post and the Baltimore Evening Sun before getting into TV back in Orlando in 1987.
So we're going to fast forward 40 years, of course. So here we are, TV. Obviously, it was a good move. But let's talk about the difference, TV versus print newspaper, right?
Yeah, in fact, TV journalism's harder than print journalism because in addition to getting the facts of the story, you have to go out and look for on-screen interviews, people willing to go on TV. And they're not as willing as they used to be either. Also, you have to find compelling characters, graphics, anything to keep the viewer interested in the story.
Yeah, it's a visual medium, right? Broadcast is. But of course, and we remind ourselves of this every day, it all starts with the story itself, right? A strong story and what can come from it. Sometimes the most compelling stories, unfortunately, it's those family tragedies. It's so hard for us to tell and to dive into. So those are the stories that we're going to dive into on this edition here of our podcast. So this segment, we're going to call it Family Matters.
Yeah, and deciding whether to even cover a family matter is a tough decision sometimes because not everything rises to the level of public interest where we feel like we should shed light on it.
Yeah, and domestic cases, child abuse, right? Even murder.
Yeah. One of the most bizarre cases I covered, though, involved the wealthy, prominent developer Sergio Pino, accused of getting some very unsavory, dangerous people to try to kill his longtime wife, Tatiana, before the divorce could be final. Now, she lived. He died by suicide as the FBI was moving in on him. One of the felons told another felon that the motive here was money, that Tatiana would not accept $20 million to walk away from their marriage that had amassed a fortune of more than $150 million.
It's over and done with. Know this. We're all good. You know what I'm saying? Everything's gonna be good.
All would not be good for Fausto Villar, heard on that call recorded by the FBI. The next day, he was arrested. Charged with accepting what the feds say was prominent developer Sergio Pino's contract to have Pino's wife of 32 years murdered.
The U.S. attorney says it now has evidence Pino was trying to poison his wife, Tatiana, with fentanyl, even before she filed for divorce in April 2022. Why?
Avery Bivens, the man who set up Villar on that call, told the feds Villar told him Pino was motivated by money, according to the criminal complaint, that Tatiana refused his $20 million settlement offer to end a marriage that had amassed a 2022 net worth of at least $153 million, according to a record produced in their divorce case.
So the feds allege Pino set up what the FBI called two murder crews.
In August 2023, their indictment claims one of them rented this Home Depot truck to slam into Tatiana's car as she drove into her driveway after leaving a divorce hearing. She was uninjured. On March 11th, Bayron Bennett, a worker on the Pino's yacht, was taken into federal custody, and on that same day, Sergio Pino executed his last will and testament, leaving Tatiana out.
The criminal complaints describe a more serious attempt on June 23rd as a gunman approached Tatiana in the same driveway, running after the car as she drove to the back of the house. She managed to get inside without a shot being fired, according to the complaint, but the gunman then pointed the weapon in the face of Pino's daughter, Alessandra, after she emerged from the house. She called 911.
There's a gun with a gun.
What do you mean there's a guy with a gun?
Yes, he just pointed a gun at me, and they're still here.
But he did not fire. The next day, the FBI searched Pino's home and Coral Gables offices and he soon learned suspected members of the crews the FBI claims he arranged were in custody. The July 15th call you're about to hear became a public record after the Miami Herald successfully moved the federal court for its release. It was played in court in August, part of the government's successful case to keep Villar behind bars pre-trial.
It's gonna be good. Everything gonna be straight. Straight. But the smoke has to clear.
That was Bivens reassuring Villar, a man he met as they both did time in Florida prisons. Villar was worried.
Everything has to clear. Smoke has to clear. So with what you got, try to fend off.
But it was too late for Bivens to fend off the FBI. He was already helping them build their case.
We need a plan where, let's say, God forbid, they knock on your door one day. Someone's gotta let me know through here, hey, like a code or something, yo.
Sergio Pino is unnamed on the call, but referred to as Villar's guy, according to prosecutors. At Villar's detention hearing, his attorney argued Pino was the real threat.
The person that was a source of this murder for hire, the mastermind, I think it's unequivocal that this is all Sergio Pino's doing. He's gone.
Villar, who ran a roofing company that was working on Pino's mansion as all this played out, had already paid Bivens $75,000 cash, part of Pino's $150,000 contract to murder Tatiana, according to the FBI. On the call, Villar told Bivens they'd get more from their alleged benefactor if things turned out for the best for them.
So at the end of the day, when it's all done, I'm sure that there will be a little gift for me and like for you. So let's just do what we gotta do, G. You know what I'm saying?
Also, on the day of the call, Pino was amending lucrative trust agreements he had first set up in March when he signed his will. And there are indications on the recorded call that Villar thought Pino might be considering suicide if the feds moved in, according to two people close to the case who have also listened to the call. Of course, that's exactly what Pino did the next day.
A shocking end for a man who rose from next to nothing to be one of the wealthiest and most successful developers in South Florida.
Tony, so what's happened since then? We're late January now, 2026, when we recorded this.
Yeah, well, of the 9 defendants, 5 of them have been sentenced to between 9 and 20 years in prison. Villar has pled guilty and is awaiting sentencing.
We talk about those Florida stories, and this was one of those only in Florida stories, right?
It really was. And, and unfortunately, domestic violence can strike anyone, anywhere, of any class, really. Often there are warning signals. And when I first heard 3 people were killed in Tamarac early last year during a reported custody kidnapping, I immediately dug into the public record and found the sheriff's office dropped the ball on this one.
Long before those gunshots rang out Sunday morning on Plum Bay Parkway, Broward Sheriff's deputies knew domestic violence allegations were made by 34-year-old Mary Catherine Jingles, who lived here with her 4-year-old daughter, Seraphine. In court records, NBC6 Investigates found she'd been warning for a year that she lives in constant fear of her husband. He was going to shoot me and there's nothing I could do about it, she quoted him saying. He even started singing a song about how he was going to kill me. Because of Nathan's psychotic behavior, his multiple threats, his drug use, she said he used Adderall, his multiple many silenced firearms, and my impending divorce actions, I am afraid Nathan will kill me and my daughter.
I remember, Tony, that press conference, Sheriff Gregory Tony. I remember I was listening in. I remember you asking those questions. We knew that there was a lot to come out from this one.
It was the day after that first story ran. The sheriff specifically mentioned our reporting as he explained that this was one tragedy that could have been averted.
And it's inexcusable that individuals fail to perform their job. It's just work by other officers. There will be people that will lose their job over this.
That will take time, but Tony today confirmed 2 failures NBC6 Investigates revealed yesterday. Failure to pursue felony charges against Jingles despite evidence he placed a tracker like this one on his wife's car.
What I witnessed in October, the first call that came out was related to a tracker. I saw some of your stories. You're accurate in that assessment. It's clear that we probably could have done more in that element, and that's what we're looking at. And at that time, based on the evidence and things that were presented, there was enough there where we could have potentially pursued a probable cause affidavit so we can arrest him and take him off the street.
But Sunday, he was on this street to kidnap their daughter, 4-year-old Serafine, who told deputies her father killed her grandfather after saying bye-bye, then chased her mother across the street where she witnessed him killing her, and a Good Samaritan who let her in his house. Then Jingles and Serafine walked right toward the sergeant parked there, right next to a house that captured them on surveillance video. Listen to what the sergeant radioed others.
I got a white male with a hooded sweater. He's walking with me. Child maybe 4 years old. They're here heading southbound on East Grand Duke Circle. It's unknown if it's related at this time. Just finding kind of hard walking around at this time of the morning. And she has no shoes on.
Odd, but apparently not odd enough for the sergeant to get out of his car and approach who all would soon learn were the killer and his kidnap victim.
Nathan Jingles faces the death penalty. If convicted, he's pled not guilty.
So it's Jingles, but what about the deputies?
Well, the sheriff did fire several of those deputies, including those who responded to the shooting, like that sergeant you just saw, as well as some who were involved in the domestic violence investigation that failed to lead to the arrest before 3 people were killed. A sergeant, by the way, is suing to get his job back.
What about that little girl? What about Serafina? What happened?
Well, you know, Nathan Jingles gave up his rights to his daughter soon after he was arrested. That led to an adoption proceeding. And while they're confidential, I have it from a very reliable source that Serafina has now been placed with a member of Nathan's family, adopted.
These are so tough. These family matters, right? So hard to cover.
They are, but they often reveal flaws in the system, and we don't just do it from like a voyeuristic way of getting into family tragedies. You know, you saw those flaws in the sheriff's office, and that led to some change. But in 2012, I uncovered a huge mistake by both police and prosecutors in a murder trial that gripped the whole nation. You may remember it, the State versus Casey Anthony.
Absolutely. That's one of those stories that people, you know, no matter the age, right? If you were here in Florida, and this was a case that people were watching all across the country, the Orlando mom who did not report that her 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony was missing.
You know, I've broken a lot of news on that case, both before and during the trial, but it was a story that I broke nearly a year and a half after the trial had ended that really resonates to this day. In fact, in 2022, that work was featured in a Peacock documentary, the first time that Casey Anthony had spoken out on camera at length about what she says happened back in 2008.
The documentary is called Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. There were certainly lots of lies.
I lied to everyone because that was my whole life up to that point. Acting like everything's okay, but knowing nothing was okay.
But she insists she's not lying when she denies killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Yes, she lied about dropping Kaylee off with the imaginary nanny before going to the imaginary job at Universal Studios.
It's very weird.
Ducking her parents for weeks while partying it up with her new boyfriend and his crew.
I was so numb during so much of that.
She blames her father, George, just as her attorneys did during her death penalty trial, raising enough doubt for a jury to find her not guilty of murder.
We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
But after the verdict, I reported the state had failed to examine critical computer records that showed searches on the day Kaylee disappeared. As I explained in the documentary,
our records show she was at or near that house that entire day until 4:11 in the afternoon when she left. We have the cell locations of where she was, but to fill in the gaps, we have the computer records. At 2:51 that afternoon, someone searches for the term foolproof suffocation.
Then goes to a page describing how to kill oneself with poison, suffocation, and plastic bags. The same things the state argued she used to kill Kaylee and then dump her body in a nearby swamp. It's a question I've wanted to ask Casey for a decade. Did she do those searches?
Wasn't me. I can tell you that. Everyone had each other's passwords because it was a family computer. But I didn't make those searches.
The evidence suggested it was her, but she again blames her father.
There was enough time for him to have been home, still made those searches, and then left for work.
George Anthony has denied any involvement, and police said they charged the only person they think was involved.
And that would be Casey Anthony, who again was found not guilty. And at last check, I heard she was living up on the Treasure Coast.
And that jury, Tony, never heard about the search for foolproof suffocation on the same afternoon that Kaylee was last seen alive, right?
Can you imagine how important that might have been to the case? But they didn't, because the state attorney's office and the sheriff's office did not have anyone on staff competent enough to examine a Mozilla Firefox browser and extract that information. They had seized it from the Anthony home years before the trial. I developed sources over the years covering this case who were able to extract the history, and I was able to report that Casey was most likely the one on that computer at the time that search for foolproof suffocation was made.
And that would have made,
and as you heard, she denies it.
Yeah, that would have made a big difference. Family tragedies go, of course, horrific. The death of Kaylee, that was a hurtful one. That was a really, really big one.
One I'll never forget.
Yeah. Let's talk about what we have coming up on our next segment here, Tony.
Well, where family tragedies usually have just one victim, we wanted to look back at events with multiple victims and show why not all of them turn out to be crimes.
All right. So join us for that conversation coming up next on Assignment, 40 Years of Covering Florida.